Right now, I do want to get you to the latest on the US-Iran conflict, as there have been so many different developments here. Popping that up on your screen, that is a live look over the Strait of Hormuz at this hour, as, again, we get to the latest information coming in from U.S. Central Command, as they now confirm at least 13 American service members have been injured over the last week, but all of them have survived, and the remarks come after Iran claimed that it had launched an attack on a U.S. base in Syria, capturing and killing American troops. Well, CENTCOM says that did not happen. You can see the post right here from U.S. Central Command, as they claim Iranian forces claim that they attacked that base in Syria and captured or killed American troops in the process. False. Fact. No U.S. troops in the region have recently been killed or captured. Now, there are also several different developments that are coming in, as we know the U.S. has launched its 7th straight day of strikes there on Iran, as talks have, of course, stalled there. Central Command saying that it hit surveillance sites, military logistics infrastructure, underground weapon storage, and maritime capabilities. U.S. forces employed fighter aircraft, aerial drones, and warships, in addition to other assets. CENTCOM continuing to hold Iran accountable at the commander-in-chief's direction while fully enforcing a naval blockade against Iranian ports. Now, we've also heard from I-24 News English that Kuwait is saying Iran struck another power and a desalination plant, warning that it will respond decisively. So it sounds as though Kuwait will be responding. Now, we also know here that Iraq, Jordan, and Kuwait have said that they have received missile fire that they've intercepted from Iran. So much happening here. So I do want to bring in a friend of the show to discuss it all. We do have Javed Ali. He is over at the Gerald R. Ford School of Public Policy at the University of Michigan. He's worked with the FBI, the Department of Homeland Security, and the Defense Intelligence Agency. Thank you so much for taking the time to be here with us today to help break all of this down.
Josh, good morning to you.
Good morning. Well, first off, I want to talk just a little bit further here about that situation there, as we're seeing that those attacks have been essentially put forth by Iran. Missiles fired at Kuwait, Iraq, Jordan. What do you make of the fact that these Gulf Arab nations that are the neighbors of Iran are being fired at as well?
So, Josh, here we are now into what looks like a replay of the type of fighting that happened in the early days of the conflict after February 28th. So, if your viewers remember, almost immediately, once in the aftermath of Israel and the United States attacking Iran, Iran basically opened fire on the rest of the region and conducted the types of attacks that we're seeing now. The Iranians were doing that literally within minutes or hours of being attacked themselves on February 28th. And then for those first few weeks, that's what the conflict looked like. So Iran is basically using the same playbook that they used months ago. But I think one of the interesting questions is, despite the amount of strikes that the U.S. and to a lesser degree now Israel have conducted against Iran, Iran still has a significant amount of military capability through the ballistic missiles, the drones, and the cruise missiles that either they hadn't used before, that weren't targeted and destroyed or degraded. And so this fight will continue to go on for a while because both sides are still armed fairly significantly.
And one thing that's interesting is you do get a lot of information that comes out of Iran, especially from Iranian state TV, just like what we heard with that attack on a U.S. base in Syria. But we later learned that that base was actually one that the U.S. had withdrawn from back in February as Operation Epic Fury was getting underway. So how exactly do you sort through what is accurate and inaccurate provided by Iran? Because I have to imagine that 99.9% of what Iranian state TV is putting out is false.
Yeah, we've seen in the past that information coming from Iranian-controlled media or government-controlled media is often highly unreliable and bombastic, and it seems like just deliberately false. And is that because they are just trying to shape the narrative and boost morale and play to internal audiences? They're not really concerned about providing facts externally. That's probably likely what's at play, and why they chose to target the Al-Antaf garrison in Syria, which had been in the years past a pretty important outpost for U.S. Special Operations troops for counter-ISIS operations and other missions in that part of Syria and the region. Maybe they thought that there was still a U.S. presence there, and they decided to target it and use weapon systems. But yeah, you always have to take what comes out of Iranian state media with a grain of salt, because it is often not accurate or unreliable.
And we're always asking the folks watching here what they think about the specific subject here. So the question that we're posing, what concerns you the most about the U.S.-Iran conflict right now? And Javed, I'm not sure if you can see it, but it's there on the bottom of the screen. And the options are the war escalating, the safety of the U.S. troops, higher gas prices, and global economic impact. So if you want to vote, all you got to do is scan that QR code bottom right-hand side of your screen, or to make it a little easier, go to livenowfox.com/connect. And the votes are just coming in, so there's not more than a handful at this point, but 77% say the safety of the U.S. troops and 13% the war escalating, 10% saying it's the global economic impact. For folks out there who have heard a lot as we talk about the economic impact, hearing a lot about the Strait of Hormuz, which, I mean, if we're being honest, you didn't hear as much about prior to Operation Epic Fury. But can you kind of explain how that factors in here, as you have the U.S. saying, we are the guardians of the Strait of Hormuz, but you have Iran saying, no, no, we are in charge?
Well, now here we are 4 months into this campaign, and it looks like the key disagreement between Iran and the U.S. is that very issue. This, who is going to control the Strait of Hormuz? What will the system of that control look like? Will Iran be allowed to charge tolls or fees for ships coming in and out of the Gulf through the Strait, or will the U.S. do it by maintaining a military presence in the region, which is obviously already there? But there are costs associated for both sides for doing that. And on the U.S. side, going back to some of these poll results you shared, there are still 50,000 plus U.S. Military personnel scattered throughout the region, either on military bases in parts of the region, or now on 2 carrier battle groups and other naval platforms in the region. So the safety and security of those personnel for either this mission to take control of the Strait, or to keep engaging these military operations against Iran. I mean, this is going to be a significant issue. There's also a price tag associated with that well. It's already run into the tens of billions of dollars. So these issues are all intertwined, Josh. But what looks like now that this conflict is basically over who is going to control the Strait of Hormuz. No one's talking anymore about Iran's nuclear program or keeping the status of the clerical regime. It's all about control of the Strait of Hormuz.
I want to talk a little bit more about what we saw essentially as we look back here to last January, I would say, maybe even December, as we were seeing protesters start to take to the streets there across Iran, not just talking about Tehran, but really in cities all over. And of course, we saw those protests kind of die down as more and more protesters were executed. And at this point, it does appear that those protesters are still being executed. We're just not hearing as much about it, and that could potentially be deterring other protesters from taking to the streets again.
Well, in the aftermath of the beginning of the military conflict between Iran, the U.S., and Israel, we have not seen those images that we saw at the beginning of the year and at the end of last year, with Iranians being angry over all the economic and social and cultural issues inside the country. And we saw the brutal crackdown from the regime, where they basically killed or imprisoned thousands, if not tens of thousands, of their own countrymen. So this is something I don't see happening anytime soon, because the Iranian people, even though they probably are beyond angry at the regime, they have to fear for their own safety and security. And on the flip side, over the past few months, and certainly in the past couple of weeks, we've seen these different kind of images of Iranians mobilizing to the streets for the funeral procession of Ayatollah Khamenei in the mornings over his death, and there were millions of people there. Now, some of that was probably staged and controlled, but still, that's a different type of mood inside the country than the ones we were seeing 6 months ago or at the end of last year.
And what I want to do is actually pop this up once again, because this is a look at the post from Central Command. As we know, this is the seventh straight day in a row that the U.S. has been striking those different spots in Iran. What is that telling us overall about where things are kind of headed now? Because I have to imagine that there's a good likelihood that we're going to have an 8th day, 9th day, 10th day, and so on.
Well, again, like as I said a few minutes ago, I do think this resembles now what we saw at the beginning of the conflict from February 28th to basically mid-April, where every day both Iran and the United States, and back then Israel, were attacking each other. So here we are now into the 7th day. I agree, we're probably going to see this continue for a while. Is it contained though, or will it escalate even further? I think that is also a possibility. And what happened to the memorandum of understanding that was agreed to about a month ago, and the 60-day clock for getting all the conditions on that hammered out? A month has passed, so there's only theoretically 30 days left for that MOU to be finalized. So is diplomacy has it completely stopped? And are the prospects for that MOU being finalized just over? That's an open question, but you don't hear either side really talking about restarting or kickstarting the negotiations to finalize the MOU.
All right, and I want to talk about some of the other topics here, because the U.S. officials have now essentially said, and this is coming from the Department of National Intelligence, that Hamas, we of course can kind of think back to October 7th, as Israel has been fighting against Hamas since the October 7th attack by the Hamas terror group on Israel. And we're hearing from the DNI that essentially it appears at this point that there are about 20,000 or more Hamas fighters that are out there. And some reports indicate there could be about 25,000 or more that exist at this point. And it does sound as though that's about the same number as we were talking about before October 7th. Break that down for folks, but also kind of explain the significance overall.
Yeah, Josh, you and I have talked about October 7th for many interviews in the aftermath of that attack in Israel. And before October 7th, the general assessment, both from Israel and the U.S. intelligence community, based on public statements, was that Hamas pre-October 7th had about 20 to 25,000 fighters that either under current arms or they could mobilize if called upon. And if we are hearing now from both the DNI and Israel, because a senior general in the Israeli Defense Forces put that number out a couple days ago, about roughly 25,000 Hamas fighters. That shows that Hamas, despite all the pressure they were under for 2+ years in the aftermath of October 7th, and a lot of losses, to include most of their senior leadership, that the group has maintained the strength of the organization. Now, they've just probably backfilled and recruited new people to come into the organization. It's not like they didn't lose anyone for the past couple of years, but that just shows the viability of Hamas. It was not, quote unquote, militarily defeated despite all the pressure it was under. And here we are now into almost 3 years, coming up on the third anniversary of October 7th. And what is the future of Hamas in the Gaza Strip? And Israel's now occupied the Gaza Strip and has 2 combat divisions there. But it doesn't sound like that Board of Peace plan that was supposed to come up with a long-term solution to governance in Hamas or governance in the Gaza Strip and removing Hamas as a governing force. That doesn't seem like it's made much progress.
And of course, before I let you go here, another big question. We talk about Israel, so we also have to talk about the Hezbollah terror group over in Lebanon. As we take a live look over Beirut at this hour, you could see things remain fairly calm, at least from the aerial view that we have here over Beirut. I wanted to ask where things kind of stand. Are we still seeing a ceasefire there? Are we seeing the potential for really Hezbollah firing once again at Israel?
Yeah, I think that could happen at any moment. But there was the ceasefire agreed to a few weeks ago between Israel and the government of Lebanon. Hezbollah was not part of that because they're not formally part of Lebanon. But just like Hamas, Hezbollah has thousands, if not tens of thousands of fighters under arms, still probably has a significant amount of rocket and missile capability that they haven't used or Israel hasn't destroyed or degraded through all the operations Israel has conducted against Hezbollah. So it wouldn't surprise me as well to see a resumption of that really intense fighting we've seen in different stretches in 2024 and 2025 and this year too between Israel and Hezbollah. We just haven't seen it recently, but it could flare up at any moment.
All right, my last question here. I think I said the last one was the last, but here's the actual last question. What are you going to be watching for as we talk about the U.S.-Iran conflict? We went into detail here, but specifically over the next hours, days, and even weeks here, what exactly are you going to be watching for?
Well, I think we're going to have to watch to see how long will this continued cycle of attacks by Iran and the U.S. continue. It doesn't seem like there's any signs of that slowing down. Will these attacks also escalate and broaden and intensify in scope or volume? Those are things to watch for. And at the same time, will both sides kind of go back to their respective corners using that boxing analogy? And will diplomacy or negotiations come back to the front? And will the MOU get back on track? So sort of two parallel tracks of things to watch that may converge. And we're just going to have to wait and see how it plays out.